My guest tonight, Jon Kelly, is an international clinician, if I'm saying that right, and internationally acclaimed communications expert who released key intelligence pertaining to the Iraq War 2 years ago in advance of the shock and awe strikes against Baghdad in 2003. As a former feature producer for CBS Radio with experience in #1 rated U.S. television, his work exploring consciousness, communications, the paranormal, and UFO phenomena have been featured in USA Today, Dallas Morning News, Florida Today, Wall Street Journal, Independent IE, UC Irving Today, Coast to Coast AM, Fox News, CBS Radio and Television, CBC, BBC, London, Dutchland Radio Berlin, AOL News, Tehran's Fars News Agency, and UFO Digest and Forbes.com. So he's been a lot of places, folks, and he's here with us tonight on Late Night in the Midlands. I'm just going to pull up my phone lines here and bring him in with me. So with that, everybody, please welcome Jon Kelly in just a second. Jon, welcome back to Late Night in the Midlands. How are you?
Great, Michael. It's good to be with you again.
Well, it's great to have you here. You sound great.
Right on. Thank you.
All right. So it's been a long time since you've been on.
Well, good friends don't always get to see each other, and so I'm just happy to return.
Well, thank you, and I'm very happy to have you here. And I did get the clips that you sent me, and I've got them loaded up, and at some point we'll get into those. I'd like to start out, though, because we got a lot of new listeners from the last time you've been on. Jon, what drove you in this direction that you've taken, going down this rabbit hole and investigating and researching the areas you have?
Well, I guess I feel a strong sense of identification with looking into life's mysteries, frontiers of knowledge and science and human understanding. Areas of great mystery have crossed. My life has crossed those areas at different times, even since childhood. I'm someone who's had contact with Sasquatch in British Columbia, a lot of UFO contact, other kinds of interdimensional phenomena, psychic visions, lucid dreaming, out-of-body experience. I'm eventually somebody who got intensely involved in meditation practices and have been doing those for over 25 years as a means of navigating all of the different mysteries that just popped up in my life. So I'm one of those people who came here with some destiny attached to or connection with the mysteries of life and the frontiers of knowledge. And I've just been active in these areas as best I can. And there's circumstances have prevailed to support me to continue to work in these areas.
Great. And I understand that you're friends with Alfred Weber. He's a good friend of ours as well. We've had him on several times.
Alfred is one of my colleagues here in Vancouver, British Columbia, and I've collaborated with him on numerous broadcasts over the last decade or so, and other related projects. Exo University, we covered the serial killer tapes that I studied, the Robert Pickton recordings. We covered that together. It's on my YouTube channel. So, it's been great to have access to Alfred, who's such a wonderful resource person to so many people. Rich with ideas and insight, and someone who's really able to frame events, contemporary events, in context due to his decades of experience on the front lines of research into psi, futurism, etc.
Absolutely. Now I want to talk a little bit about reverse speech and what got you started in that, and what is, I guess people sit on the fence with it. They think, it's interesting, but could it really be what they're actually saying? So maybe you could explain the reverse speech just a little bit to us. Tell us more about that.
Well, these studies that have been popularized under the name reverse speech really are based on the phenomena of reflection. Phenomena of reflection are older than life itself. as soon as liquid bodies appeared in the universe, like oceans of water and such on a solid Earth, before life emerged, those liquid bodies possessed reflective characteristics, which means that sunlight beaming down from the sky could reach a pond or a puddle, and those photons could be reflected back from that surface to some degree. So the phenomenon of reflection is ancient, and we as humans find ourselves in a world possessed of that phenomenon in different ways. Man-made reflectors are called mirrors, and the production of mirrors is something that goes back into ancient societies using different materials. People have been mirror gazing or studying reflections, so to speak, scrying for thousands of years. There's references to it in Greek literature and other literary sources from classical societies. I think for contemporary people, it's important to note that through the process of mirror gazing in the 17th century, Isaac Newton was able to resolve the phases of Venus and the moons of Jupiter using what he devised as the first reflector telescope. Now, in order to construct that telescope, he utilized a mirror made out of metal alloy, and that alloy composition was called speculum metal, or mirror metal, speculum being Latin for mirror. It's said that Newton's mirror possessed 66% reflectivity and 34% light absorbency. And so he was using a very lossy technology. He was losing 34% of the incoming light transmission. So we can understand if a soda pop costs $1 and we go to the store with 66 cents, we may not be able to get that $1 soda pop with our 66 cents. We'll be 34 cents short. And if we're communicating like on the show tonight, and 34% of my sentences are truncated or parsed, it may be difficult for people to understand what I'm talking about, because some important things could be lost in that transmission when there's a 34% rate of loss. And yet, in spite of those shortcomings, in spite of that lossy mirror that Newton relied on, he was still able to resolve phenomena that included the phases of Venus, where it waxes and wanes just like our moon. And he was also able to resolve moons of Jupiter, which are both the phases of Venus and the moons of Jupiter are known factual phenomena. This is in the 17th century. If you wind the clock up into our 21st century, at the very turn of the millennium, there were reports emerging out through scientific journals, including Nature, whereby scientists in Southern California at the University of California at Irvine were conducting studies using digital mirror technology to reflect recordings of human vocal transmissions. Those digital mirrors were operating in a lossless way, meaning that they provided 100% reflectivity and zero loss of sound transmission. So much more refined mirror, a much more precise means of reflection. And they found through their studies that when they intermingled human speech recordings that were spliced forwards and backwards in different varying percentages, that observers were able to decipher and decode the speech in those recordings, irrespective of how much backward speech was contained therein. So this was reported in letters to one of the editions of Nature, which is a highly respected scientific journal. And this was later picked up by the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society. The Royal Society, which was in fact the group steered by Newton in his lifetime. He was the president of that esteemed scientific community in the United Kingdom. They're still active today, and they noted this study in their Philosophical Transactions, which is their journal publication. And it was, essentially determined, in layman's terms, that the brain understands backward speech. So through the use of digital audio technology and precision mirror filtering, scientists were investigating speech intelligibility and determining that the brain could resolve speech forwards or backwards. One of the lead scientists, Dr. Koresh Saberi from the University of California at Irvine, one of the lead scientists in that study, commented in a publicized interview that human speech is a multidimensional phenomenon. That was his conclusion based on those studies. Speech is a multidimensional phenomena, and there are different ways by which we can derive a message from it. Those are his exact words. So science has opened the doors to investigative studies that explore the various dimensions of speech. My studies focus on the mirror dimension and its corresponding natural or forwards time dimension, just 2 dimensions. But according to science, there's more than 2 dimensions to speech. So reflection, mirrors, this is what we're using to study speech recordings. Is simply put, that natural human speech, speech communications that take place every day through most of us who are gifted with speech and hearing. That's the majority of the population. Those can be interpreted using a mirror filter. In my case, I'm using what's called a digital audio workstation, which is a computer that's configured with software to perform a variety of audio editing functions. Those speech recordings can be interpreted using such a system. It's not a proprietary system. It's off-the-shelf technology. And through those reflections, we can resolve additional insight into speech communications. It's understood that what we're picking up on through these studies, by those resolutions of communications, relate to other types of unconscious speech phenomena that are widely known and accepted. One being what's called the Freudian slip, which most of us are familiar with, which is a situation in which a speaker may involuntarily utter information that they didn't intend to say in the course of normal speech. They may disclose something that was not intentional, and yet people say these things, and it's noted as what's called a Freudian slip when that happens. And another form of speech communications that many people participate in, Michael, you may know some people who do this, it's called sleep talking. Do you know anyone who talks in their sleep?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Well, we know that when the sleep talker is communicating, that those statements are not volitional on the part of their conscious mind. The conscious mind isn't engaged in sleep talking. It's unconscious communications. It's involuntary expansion and contraction of the vocal muscles, the muscular tissues related to speech formation, like the tongue and the larynx. Those involuntary contractions and expansions are creating utterances that can be resolved as speech communications. So we know that there is such a thing as unconscious speech behavior in the Freudian slip and in sleep talking. And so I say, these reflections are also indications of such unconscious behavior, that a part of the mind that apparently functions in a way that is independent of time is able to formulate and transmit communications against what physicists call the arrow of time. Against that arrow of time, time, according to physics, is all moving forwards. But here we have evidence of communications phenomena contrary to that arrow, antagonistic to that arrow's direction, in fact, traveling in the opposite direction. So the philosophical speculation is that the part of the mind that is actively engaged in those communications is functioning in a way that's operating independent of time.
I see. So now, in the case of somebody who's talking in their sleep, now my son does that quite often. When he's here, he'll fall asleep early and he'll talk in his sleep. One night, he was actually swearing in his sleep. And I had to debate whether I should wake him up with a kick to his butt or if he just did not know what was going on. I mean, when something like this happens, is there a reason to really pay attention to what they're saying in their sleep? I mean, is it just mumbo jumbo, or is there some kind of truth coming out with this?
Well, it's certainly symptomatic of some sort of activity of the mind. I mean, if we're not at peace over something within ourselves, something is unresolved, we may seek to work that out through sleep talking or sleepwalking or other kinds of somnambulistic behaviors. Active dreaming, of course, is another way. So should we judge others for their involuntary indiscretions? That's a very good question. I say that the conscious individual is innocent of those behaviors. We shouldn't judge others for their involuntary actions, but we should at the same time take note that if somebody's sleep is disturbed, there may be something emerging in their life experience that needs to be addressed or needs to be resolved, and that observation of those phenomena may provide a window into discussion or exploration, working together with that person to help them work out the details in their lives that may be troubling them while they're attempting to rest.
I see. And all too often you hear, say, a public speaker will slip, as you say, and say something, say, "Oh, I don't know where that came from. That's not what I meant." How should we take that when that happens? I mean, because is there cases where they really just slipped up? And
well, again, it's innocent on part of the speaker, but there are times when those statements can be meaningful in judicial proceedings. For example, in the course of my studies, I've seen highly visible suspects in murder cases who would go on camera with television news crews who were covering deaths in a community and, present themselves as community leaders who wanted to get to the bottom of the crime. And in the course of their public statements on camera, they would slip additional statements qualifying themselves as the suspect, and that could provide a meaningful avenue for investigation. So the things that we disclose can be meaningful in different ways. Sometimes it's only a barometer or an indicator of our emotional condition, and we should try to cultivate some sympathy for our fellow humans in our moments of weakness, and not rush to judgment over indiscretions that may not even be voluntary. People find themselves in this world struggling through circumstance upon circumstance, perhaps with no real understanding of why things happen in their lives, and they're simply doing their best to get through each day. We shouldn't judge those people too harshly in their difficulty. Maybe we should find a way through compassion to approach questions when we feel there's an indiscretion, is to work with people as best we can, with an understanding that there may be more to that person or to that person's what's happening in that person's mind than we would necessarily understand at first glance.
Yeah, and that all stands true until we get to government officials, and like even the president or what have you, and when they're addressing the public and they slip up. Usually when they slip up, it's really hard to let that go, because you want to know, did they really mean what they just said?
Well, there's a number of interesting examples in contemporary media, not only from the government officials, but even the personalities in the news. You've probably seen those newscasts where reporters have conducted themselves on camera in such a way as to give the impression that they were undergoing a stroke, where they actually lost control of their speech communications temporarily, and they had to be taken off camera. You probably saw some of those broadcasts.
Yeah, and that happened to Judge Judy once too, right?
So many people, I don't know if there's any easy answers as to why those particular incidents were happening, but a rush to judgment may not secure us in the truth. It is good at the same time to take note of these incidents, and if we have to tabulate and make a decision, if we're going to give our vote to an individual, it's good to draw up a chart, not unlike what Ben Franklin would have as a tally sheet with our pros and cons, and to conduct an assessment that way. In other words, discretion and discrimination have their place in life. Many of us are simply guided by emotion in our decision making, and emotional decision making may not serve us well under times of intense stress. Somebody who is in a battlefield type of a scenario, making decisions purely based on emotions, such as anger, may commit themselves to a terrible mistake with fatal consequences. And so those cooler heads may prevail, and to maintain that cool head can be a virtue in any condition.
Okay, I see. Now, with the whole reverse speech thing, I remember being a teenager, and we used to get the Led Zeppelin records on the record player, and we'd play them backwards, and you would actually hear stuff. Would that class? I mean, would that fall in the same class with, I mean, when they were singing their songs? I mean, were they actually talking about Satan subconsciously?
Well, there's a lot of lore surrounding that. One of the personalities in the Led Zeppelin band reportedly bought the house that was owned by Aleister Crowley.
Oh.
And Crowley is, amongst other things, is a reported pedophile and black magician. So, were there cultural influences in that environment where they were ostensibly recording or practicing or hanging out? I haven't been to visit that property, but it remains open to speculation. Now, to clarify, what you're describing is a related procedure. Mirroring an audio recording, listening to its reflection, is exactly what I'm talking about. But the source in this case is something that was contrived in a studio. It was manicured over dozens, even hundreds of hours of production time. Compared to spontaneous, natural human voice communications that happen instantaneously with no preconception or contrivance. So those are two different sources in that regard. We could say that at the risk of, without the intention of diminishing anyone's artistic contribution, that a pre-prepared recording that's heavily manicured in a studio is contrived. And in the course of contriving such an artifact, artistic personalities may be persuaded to add additional special effects to their recordings. So many of these competitive marketers may have pushed recording artists in the 70s or 60s, 70s, or 80s to throw in additional layers of layers of vocals into their tracks, with special palindromic-like qualities, meaning that they could be recited both forwards and backwards with related or unrelated meanings. In other words, they would be somewhat disguised or camouflaged as forwards vocals that had a backwards meaning. But beyond those contrivances, there will also be instances of spontaneous expressions that are more related to what I'm studying, which are insightful windows into the consciousness of the personality who's speaking, and private and personal disclosures beyond what the conscious mind would be willing to participate in, even for the sake of marketing a record. Right,
and what you're doing, we know that it's straight up, and there's nothing being added to it. And I could see how with the album industry that they would do something like that, because I can't tell you how many of my friends would go out and buy an album just because they heard that if you play it backwards, you hear this or that. So it was very good marketing.
Yeah, it's a gimmick, absolutely, and that's it. Also plays on the superstitious or the occultic qualities that are that the meme or the archetype of the mirror possesses within culture anyways. In other words, the mirror with its reflective qualities is the subject of much dogma and superstition in Western society. And we can look back again at in classical Greek culture, the author of Life After Life, which is a famous book on reincarnation. The name escapes me temporarily, but in that book, it's discussed that the ancient Greeks, in the cultural process of grieving over the death of a loved one, would sometimes involve utilizing a pool of water in a dark room, like a cave, and through some kind of cultural practice, participants in those observations that gazing on that reflective surface would see the impressions of the departed spirit. That's in that book, Life After Life, a very famous book on reincarnation. In other words, we're talking about the mirror as a doorway to the afterlife, or the mirror as a doorway to another dimension. That's quite occultic or heavily imbued with what could be construed as superstition. Now, we know that the Renaissance scientists like Newton, were also alchemists or mystics. So modern material science was born out of mystical inquiry.
Yeah.
The founders of contemporary Western material science, such as Newton, were also practicing mystics. So it's not far removed from that domain to talk about somebody who was engaged in crystal gazing or mirror gazing, with a preconception that the mirror would serve as a doorway into perceptions of other dimensional or interdimensional phenomena. That archetype exists. The folkloric magic mirror that's presented in fairy tales such as Sleeping Beauty, wherein personalities utter the phrase, mirror, mirror on the wall.
Yeah.
I mean, that's folkloric, and it's part of Western culture. So there is tremendous superstition and perceptions of occultism associated with the mirror, particularly in societies that are heavily institutionalized around Christian ideals, wherein we're talking societies that would enforce dictates to burn witches at stakes. Anyone who was perceived as being participating in occult practice was ostracized, tortured, and murdered. That's part of our Western European tradition as well. So what we have as a consequence, we have a materialistic, atheistic worldview that is part of the foundation of modern science. We're atheists and we're materialists, and we're bringing this into the natural world to try to understand ourselves and the world that we live in it. And as a consequence, many people living in North America feel that there's an incredible vacuum, a spiritual vacuum, whereby we are disconnected from sources of wisdom. The wisdom keepers who were burned at the stakes can't share their knowledge with us. The wisdom keepers who were massacred with the majority of the indigenous Native American population, they can't share their understanding with us. We've lost a lot in the course of our development as a modern, materialist-focused, technological society. So people who have the benefits of living in the society and are able, due to a variety of circumstances, can use this culture as a platform to reinvigorate the pathways to knowledge that we've lost along the way, in order to resolve the lingering questions that material sciences are unable to answer, that materialist philosophy is unable to quench. The thirst for knowledge that resides within us is resolved through relinking to those interdimensional connections that were understood by our ancient ancestors, understood by indigenous cultures, and that we in our course of materialist pursuit, at the sake of everything else, exemplified by practices such as exploding nuclear materials under the surface of the planet, on the surface of the planet, and in the atmosphere repeatedly for decades. That kind of destructive behavior shows complete absence of conception of anything beyond materialism. So that's the society that we live in, and the wisdom keepers who are with us and those who are emerging are called upon to reestablish the links to a holistic view that's inclusive of other dimensions of life, not just the material dimensions, so that we can find fulfillment, that our society can really serve up the happiness, the promise of the good life. The good life includes more than just material fulfillment. There's many more dimensions to us. So this mirror, in other words, with its occultic symbolism and so on, plays a role in that. It not only helped the foundations of material science by leading to the development of the modern reflector telescope. The reflector telescope is actually the telescope of choice in the majority of the largest installations of telescopes in the world, including the space telescopes such as Hubble. That's a reflector telescope. It uses a mirror. Scientists today engaged in exobiology studies, search for life on other planets, there was a congressional hearing in December where they were saying to the panel that we need to put a mirror in space. So scientists are invoking the requirement for mirrors to continue studies to understand extraterrestrial life. My studies simply say we need to apply a mirror to that inner space, the one between our ears. And that's where we begin to find all kinds of information.
Absolutely, very interesting and well put, John. And I wanna come back to this in just a moment. We've got to take a break, but when we come, that could very well be another dimension. It probably is. And what could that do? Could that be why we get so much visitation from, say, UFOs? Maybe it's another dimension, and they're saying, "Hey, what are these people doing over here?"
There's a lot of speculation about the advent of the modern era of UFO sightings, contact, etc. In the post-nuclear age. In other words, after the middle of the 1940s, when the nuclear test experiments and the first bombs were used in warfare, that there was an perceived uptick in UFO incidents, UFO crash incidents, etc. And we hear from testimonies of various contactees over the decades with regards to extraterrestrials' concerns about the advent of nuclear technologies in human hands, and particularly I think remarks commenting on we may have the means or the know-how, but does humanity possess the wisdom to successfully navigate and steer such a vehicle in a successful way, or will it lead to an ultimate catastrophe? We're still, by many people's perceptions, we're engaged in a mass non-consensual experiment right now with regards to nuclear technology, and one of the indications of that is the flood of nuclear materials that are in the Pacific Ocean due to the catastrophe in Fukushima. Mm-hmm. Where I live in Vancouver, British Columbia, it's now established that not only has there been an uptick in infant mortality, but there are also higher than normal levels of nuclear materials in the ocean waters right outside of the city. So the environment where I'm living has changed for the long term, where there are far more radioactive materials around us, and doctors have published studies showing that they could measure the infant mortality rate has increased, and they attribute that in a linear fashion to the disaster in Fukushima. So this is one of the consequences of the nuclear power industry, but nuclear power is really an offshoot of military applications of nuclear energy for weapons making. In fact, there are claims regarding Fukushima that the Japanese were in fact engaged in a covert weapons production program using those reactors to make plutonium, I believe, and this has contributed to the problem. And so it's a pressing issue of the day. And where I live on the West Coast, it's a pressing issue with relation to the collapse of the sardine fishery in 2013. There were 0 sardines that were caught in a multi-billion-dollar harvest that was expected year after year. Wow. Apparently the fry, the baby fish, is something in the environment that they can't withstand, and it's killing them in large enough quantities that there's no sardines being caught. Like there's none to be caught because they're not reaching maturity because they're all dead. Also news that's easily found through mainstream news sources is the death of the starfish population along the West Coast. From Alaska through California, the starfish are melting into the water. They are turning into bundles of goo. Oh. The entire starfish population. I mean, what is going on? This is really very disturbing. People are eating what are anticipated to be contaminated seafood and shellfish on the West Coast. There's death of the scallop population is disappearing. The alkalinity of the ocean is changing. Many of these considerations, these are not isolated incidents, but these are mass biological phenomena that are being studied by scientists and reported in mainstream news outlets, are taking place now, and they are being attributed as consequences of the intensive pollution of the Pacific Ocean due to the Fukushima crisis. You see, there's something like several 100,000 tons of irradiated water coming out of that location every day since spring 2011.
Yeah,
huge volumes of radioactive water pouring out of that facility. Now, people may say, Pacific Ocean, well, it's a very large body of water. I mean, why should people on the west coast of Canada or the United States be concerned about something happening so far away? Well, the truth is that there's something called ocean currents, and those ocean currents distribute the waters and circulate them not only across the Pacific, but throughout the world. The waters in the oceans travel through from Atlantic to Pacific, from Cape Horn to Greenland. Those waters are moving, and any materials that are let loose in those waters can circulate and travel all over the world. So not only is there nuclear material coming to the west coast here, but there's also physical materials due to simply the tsunami action that tore materials off of the land. It destroyed buildings and other infrastructure and pulled all that physical material out into the ocean. All that garbage and wreckage, there's tons of it. It's all radioactive. It's also coming here. Hawaii has already seen some of that. And there are reports of healthy young people who are engaged in activities like surfing in the waters in Hawaii who are coming down sick. There's an understanding that it's a consequence of exposure to radioactive materials in the waters in Hawaii. So these are real life concerns. These are life and death issues. People are planning on having babies under these conditions, are facing an increased infant mortality rate because, as the doctors explain, young babies don't have fully formed immune systems. So they are more vulnerable to immune-related disorders or overload from toxic materials that a healthy adult may be able to process. And it's the same with our senior citizens. If they already have immune deficiency conditions, then they are even more vulnerable to increased toxicity in the environment. So this is one of the consequences. This spin-off nuclear power industry spun off from fundamentally pure military research for the sake of manufacturing weapons of mass destruction for profit. It's one of the consequences of that. Now, Canada is heavily implicated in nuclear research due to its vast resources of uranium. And up until, I believe, 2010, Canada was the world's #1 producer of uranium in the world, and the #1 exporter of uranium used in nuclear power facilities. But one of the outcomes of uranium used for nuclear power is the production of something called depleted uranium. And that is an extremely hard and dense material that is then reverted into weapons production. So we see where the illegal wars of misadventure that have been executed or prosecuted in Afghanistan and Iraq, particularly in Iraq, the pollution of the local environment due to the intensive use of depleted uranium munitions has produced tragic birth defects, genetic mutations in the human population. The population is scarred for generations by the embedding of nuclear materials in their environment that are emitting very dangerous levels of radiation, so much so that the babies are coming out with grotesque mutations. These are consequences of our for-profit nuclear industries with no, apparently conscienceless, a complete absence of human conscience in executing those plans to simply take toxic materials out of the earth, turn them into weapons, and make a buck making unsafe power from them using unstable reactors and reactor designs and putting them on fault lines like the ones in Fukushima on the edge of the ocean. I mean, what PhD panel sat down and decided that a tsunami-prone environment on earthquake fault lines was a good place to build a series of nuclear reactors?
Yeah, go figure. It's never sat well with me either. And, I hear you talking about this, and, we've been preaching over and over about how dangerous this Fukushima mess is. And, I've had people say, oh, you're a fearmonger, you're a right-wing nut. So, I'm everything except for telling the truth. And the fact is this Fukushima it's catastrophic. I mean, it could literally wipe this planet clean.
This is incredibly reckless misadventure, and there is no consent in terms of a public process at whatsoever. This misguided misadventure is being incubated in a think tank environment under the shield of national security, and then it's being prosecuted on the members of the public who have to endure whatever bad decisions are being made, whatever ignorance or lack of wisdom is guiding these decisions. Now, I don't think we should just turn off all the electricity and the running water and start living like cave people. I'm not advocating for a return to the Stone Age. What I'm really talking about here is consequences of our modern way of life and the need for growth, change, and development that is pressing upon us. The vested interests will tell you that there's no problem. As long as they're making a profit, everything's great. But the fact is that there's tremendous injustice where a few can profit at the expense of the many. And really, technological advances have a greater purpose in serving the largest populations possible rather than only benefiting a few. That a few should benefit and make tremendous profits at the consequences of irradiating the Pacific Ocean, the biological environment for all of those animals and all the plant life that exists there, and all of the humans who live and depend on the relationship with the sea, is a mass injustice and a criminal act. And so this shouldn't be tolerated. We should have a technology that's harmonized with human needs and a process that has more democratic overtones, whereby there's public participation in making decisions that have long-term consequences for everybody. This elitist and isolated way of thinking is not constructive and is not foreseeably leading to the best result.
Oh, I agree. And, as far as the nuclear power plants, they need to all go. We have to get rid of these things. They're death traps, accidents, major accidents waiting to happen, just as Fukushima was. And some would say Fukushima was no accident. I know Alfred Weber, he's talked to me about that. He says that there was nukes that were used to cause that tsunami and everything. Now, that I don't know. All I know is it's happened, and it's catastrophic. And, we've got other means of energy. There's even what's called, some would refer to as free energy, and which is one of the reasons why I think that they don't want to tell us about the UFO phenomena. The government doesn't want to admit to it because they don't want to admit that there's an energy out there that actually doesn't pollute the planet that we could be using.
Again, the for-profit vested interests will do everything in their power to try to maintain a status quo, no matter how toxic it is. But it can be seen by any reasonable person that in the absence of any wisdom, society is going off of a cliff as a consequence of such misdirection. And we're called upon to ask questions, to question our participation in these initiatives. Just because the mainstream is going off a cliff, does that mean I should go too? Just because someone is jumping off a bridge, should I jump as well? Is that wisdom? People of conscience are called upon under these conditions to think differently, to formulate new plans, inventions, and ideas to help pave a pathway to something that is sustainable, that will work in the long term. As I said, technology needs to become an effective partner in other humanist and transhumanist initiatives beyond what we're doing now. Is purely materialistic outlook and for-profit outlook is subverting the stability of the environment, of civilization, and the future for people who want to have children.
Yeah, we're in this barrel all together, and we're headed for Niagara Falls, and it's a long way down. So I hope this barrel is built really well. That's all I can say, because we've got a lot of things facing us. Fukushima being one of the worst. Let's not forget the Gulf oil spill. That Correxic and everything, it's still affecting people. Another catastrophe in our ocean. Then you add in the chemtrails and everything else, that's the water's being poisoned by chemical spills. I mean, this is all the stuff that I used to watch in movies growing up. And I used to think, oh, thank God that's just a movie.
Well, I'm sitting here, from where my office, I can see the harbor in Vancouver, and I'm waiting for Godzilla to come up out of the ocean as a consequence of what they've done.
You probably don't need to hold your breath. I wouldn't be surprised if Godzilla didn't stand up out of that water. Just amazing. Breathing fire at that. So now we've got whistleblowers who are coming out. One in particular, Edward Snowden, and some people think that he's not on the up and up, and others see him as a hero. I say the information he's given is 100% accurate, I believe, because we've been telling people about this stuff for a long time, but it took Edward Snowden for a lot of people to listen. So what can you tell me about him based on your research? And I know that you sent me some clips, which I do have here, of his reverse speech. And so let's get into that just a little bit.
Well, to set this up, I respect that Edward Snowden is a highly controversial figure. All of this is very controversial, and there's a lot of speculation about what the true nature of intent of the Edward Snowden disclosures may or may not be. I respect people such as Sibel Edmonds, who says simply that the Snowden disclosures have not revealed anything new, and that Glenn Greenwald is just making money out of leaking drips of information and that are sensationalized in headlines every week. In other words, the news cycles are being dominated by Edward Snowden-related stories, and that the networks are making profits from the advertisers running ads against those broadcasts. So it's all become for profit, or it's stage managed. So I respect that perspective. At the same time, although I don't idealize Edward Snowden, I am sympathetic to the messages that are coming from this campaign. One of Snowden's essential messages is that in the culture of secrecy, or what the Washington Post has referred to as top secret America, there's a vacuum in public discourse concerning decisions that are affecting everyone, particularly pertaining to trespasses on human rights, like right to privacy. And so he said, in the absence of any public discourse, he's emerged to foment discussion about these questions that are otherwise not receiving any discussion whatsoever. Things are being executed upon us without our knowledge, or with tragic consequences. So I'm sympathetic to this idea that there needs to be public participation as opposed to apathy around questions about decisions about the diminishment of human rights, rights to privacy, etc. I think that's an important point that's raised through this event. And Glenn Greenwald, in his most recent posting, where he shared a 50-page document that was incubated by British intelligence, which has been described as the playbook for online operatives.
Oh yeah,
he's saying that the proliferation of disinformation through active operative campaigns in the social networks is undermining the integrity of the internet, is diluting the integrity of human communications via the internet, because there's a spy around every corner who's actually been tasked with either attacking people, who influencing discourse, suppressing communications, interfering with rights to assembly, interfering with rights to free speech. He says that this is undermining the integrity of the internet, and I think it's a very important point that he raises there. So while I respect that there are lots of questions about the stage management of Edward Snowden and the disclosures that are going on, and actually I've encountered some of that in my own reporting in the course of engaging with some of the platforms such as The Guardian, I think I'm still sympathetic to these ideas, and I resonate with those two ideas: that the need for public discourse and the need to maintain the integrity of human communications. Meaning is being lost in the noise, and we are at risk of creating an incredible environment of mass ignorance as a consequence of diluting the integrity of public discourse by incentivizing people to become professional liars in online communities, posers, trolls, harassers, and stalkers. Those people have sold out the rights of the public for the sake of a paycheck. They're not. There's nothing ideological about what they're doing. Those people are it's like those operatives are about the same level as a used car salesperson. I mean, they're just out to make a buck. That's all they're in this for. They don't care if they tell the truth or a lie. Those people have no integrity around their communications. Those people are in it for a buck. But the rest of us are in it for the sake of our own integrity. We're being victimized. We're being exploited as participants in social networks. We're being exploited by others. Our rights are being exploited for a paycheck. I have no respect for that. So that's where we find ourselves. Now, just to step back, and for the people who are not familiar with my history, my website is yourinnervoice.com. That site's been online since the late 1990s, and I've been involved in these speech studies for over 15 years. I'm somebody who was reporting military-grade intelligence about the Iraq War 2 years before it began, using this simple process of reflection. I was able to identify Baghdad as a target for missile strikes based on the George W. Bush inaugural address, which was a public domain speech that I studied from thousands of miles away. And I was able to identify key information related to a mission of Baghdad and a missile attack, which describes the shock and awe strikes that commenced the Iraq War in 2003. So as a result of breaching the intelligence security perimeter surrounding the plans of the Pentagon, I've been encountering the operative environment for over a decade. I've been in the midst of that. So that it's moved on to Facebook and these other YouTube and other social networks, it's the same playbook, the same players. There's just more of them now. That's what the Washington Post wrote up in their series called Top Secret America. They identified that there were 750,000 people employed in national security intelligence operative capacity through various agencies. 750,000 people. You see, in the Great Depression of the 1930s, one of the solutions that was brought forward was mass public works projects like building roads and dams to get people back to work. Yeah. Government-sponsored employment. What's happened in the Great Depression / recession of the first decade of this millennium is mass employment in the surveillance police state industry. So those people are there for a paycheck. There's nothing ideological about what those operators are doing. They're in it for money, but they're making a buck by exploiting the rights of everybody else. And it's just as bad as people setting up unstable nuclear power plants and spreading toxic waste all over the world. It's on the same it's about on the same moral level from my perspective. So here we are with Edward Snowden. I've written a series of reports in my column, which is called the Vancouver UFO Examiner, for Examiner.com, and I began to study the speech of Edward Snowden, a very interesting personality, someone who claimed to be from NSA and CIA, someone who may be able to provide a window of insight into those institutions, those highly cloistered and sheltered institutions hiding behind the wall of national security. Very rare to get access to personalities from the inside. And I thought, what an interesting newsmaker, maybe an opportunity to find out if he knew anything about the UFO phenomena, which is what my column is ostensibly about UFOs and the newsmakers related to that. I wrote a series of articles beginning in June 10th of 2013. My first article was entitled "Prism Mining UFO Data Targets False Flag ET Invasion as Pretext to Space Wars." And this first clip that we'll listen to together has Edward Snowden talking about the only thing that restricts the activities of the surveillance state are policy. And there's a message in there about UFOs. So, Michael, if you see that UFO clip.
Okay, and for me here on my board, I got to go by seconds. So would that be the 43-second clip?
Hold on. I will, in 10 seconds or less, I'll load all the clips on my side, okay, and then I'll be able to tell you. Just hold on.
All right, that's great.
So this clip, the duration is 42.25. That's 43 seconds.
Okay. All right. Yep, I got that one right here. And let me stick it in the slot. And there we go. All right. So you want me to go ahead and play that, or do you want to explain?
Yeah, let's play it. And if you can pause it at 37 seconds.
Okay, we'll do. All right. Hold on a second, everybody.
The only thing that restricts the activities of the surveillance state are policy. Even our agreements with other sovereign governments, we consider that to be a stipulation of policy rather than a stipulation of law. And because of that, a new leader will be elected. They'll flip the switch, say that because of the crisis, because of the dangers that we face in the world, some new and unpredicted threat, we need more authority, we need more power, and there will be nothing the people can do at that point to oppose it, and it'll be turnkey tyranny.
All right, so there is the context that I was studying from his statements on camera from Hong Kong. I played that recording backwards, I mirror filtered it, and I conducted a study. And in that segment, I identified a phrase wherein I heard Edward Snowden say the words, "those UFOs." So if we can, let's just play the rest of the clip.
Okay. All right. There it is.
Well, this really stood out and caught my attention for several reasons. One, the Hong Kong interview of Edward Snowden had nothing to do with the UFO phenomena. Nothing ostensibly to do with disclosures about UFO information, ET contact, etc. He was there to emerge as a whistleblower talking about PRISM surveillance, the NSA's mass metadata collection program that was tapping into everyone's cell phones and emails and Skype accounts, etc.
Right.
Metadata collection, hoovering up everybody, an assumption of guilt that everyone needed to be surveilled, in warrantless wiretapping on a mass scale. And here he was talking about UFOs in an unconscious, involuntary way, as if he was sleep talking, as if somehow in the course of his journey, his tenure in the intelligence community, working for CIA and NSA, he had encountered some information pertaining to UFOs. It really caught my attention. Now, at this time, again, this is the Wayback Machine. We're in June 10th, 2013. There are no news reports tying Edward Snowden to UFOs. Nobody in any editorial newsroom is linking Edward Snowden with UFOs at that time, except me. My report links Snowden to UFOs due to this audio evidence, to this observation, this involuntary statement I felt was newsworthy, and I submitted that as a story that was published in my column. That story was syndicated over Google News and eventually recirculated by Tehran's Fars News Agency, was either in December of that year or January of 2014. I stood alone for months as the sole, providing the sole perspective on that question. I mean, my value as a contributor to discourse surrounding Edward Snowden was that I was offering a unique perspective that no one else was bringing forward anywhere in any newsroom in the world, linking Edward Snowden to UFOs, and it was via that evidence. So whether or not people believe that there's such a thing as reflection, or there's such a thing as mirrors, or there's such a thing as unconscious communications, or that I really heard that, or anything, Michael, you can vet the authenticity of that audio clip because you yourself have the tools to play audio forwards and backwards. Yeah. You can evaluate my claim that I'm acting in utter transparency here. I haven't modified anything other than using a mirror to reflect the recording. Is that not true?
That is very true. And even the last time you came on the show, I remember I went to your website, I believe, and I took a bunch of the clips and I played them, put them in my programs and ran them backwards. And I mean, they're legit. There's nothing being made up here.
So I'm acting in total transparency with regards to this. I've reported my methods, procedure, and my findings, completely transparent, and yet I really stood alone with this report. Particularly at that time, I was the first to come out with this report, and the websites support this. The date stamping on the Examiner site, on Google's archives, all of this it would be very difficult for anyone to tamper with, to go back and revise the dates to make it look like it was published on such and such a date. That's the date stamping on the Examiner website serves as independent third-party evidence of when that report was published. So there I am over 7 months ago with this report. It's not a lot of material, granted, this is just a little soundbite, but it's changing the direction of discourse surrounding the story. I'm not saying I'm pro Edward Snowden or anti Edward Snowden. I'm simply saying that he knows something about the UFO phenomena, and I'm anticipating that more information may come forward in support of my claim.
Absolutely.
That's where I stood at that time. Let's wind the clock up to the next incident. Well, what happened in the course of working with this material, I took my story to the Guardian newspaper during a live question and answer session that they hosted on July 17th, 2013 on their website. They invited readers to submit questions to be asked during a live Q&A with Edward Snowden that would be published on the site in a live feed. So, like hundreds of other people, I submitted a question about this story, which had been syndicated internationally via Google News. It was in circulation. It had been widely read. I asked Edward Snowden to comment on the question of whether he had concerns about the NSA hoovering up mass UFO information to be used hypothetically to create a case for false flag alien invasions, etc. Well, hundreds of people asked questions during that forum, and only half a dozen or so were even addressed when Edward Snowden came on to talk. The rest were ignored. But my question was actually deleted from the Guardian website.
I'll be. Now, I've had that happen to me, not with the Guardian so much, but with a lot of others.
Now, I believe you, Michael, when you say that, this is called prior restraint. And the concept of prior restraint was well understood in England, which is where the Guardian newspaper is based. It was well understood in English law. At the time of the founding of the American Constitution, prior restraint was understood as a means of depleting the marketplace of ideas, diminishing it by preventing people from engaging in free speech through censorship. So by pulling my question so that it couldn't even be engaged by even a reader to the website, that was an active form of censorship that had already been disowned by English common law at the time of the founding of the American Constitution. I mean, in other words, the social trend is going backwards. It's not progressive. It's regressive when we're moving towards censorship away from free speech. So I thought this was strange, and this began to formulate in my mind the idea that the Snowden disclosures were heavily staged and being managed in a way that was not unlike a political campaign, where we see press rooms where reporters are silenced, or questions are ignored, what questions are asked or permissible to ask, and so on. And if reporters...
I actually found out that in a lot of cases, they'll hand the press little sheets with questions that they can ask, where they can go and where they can't.
Exactly. And so what this brings to perspective is the idea that in this capacity as a reporter, as a journalist, as an independent, someone outside of the chains of command that govern these actions, disclosures, sharing of information, or suppression of information, what I've essentially been doing is acting as a non-official figure engaged in an uncontrolled disclosure.
Okay.
This is non-official, uncontrolled disclosure because of my status as an independent. And this began to color my experience as time progressed, and as I began to communicate with more people online and on the social networks. This is what began to emerge, is that my publication and discussion of this issue was becoming a problem for vested interests who were attempting to control the discourse around the disclosures of Edward Snowden. And the first indication was that the Guardian acted as a censor in an act of prior restraint by pulling my question from their website. They could have ignored the question like they did so many others. The question was torn down because somebody didn't want anybody to even begin to engage in discussions about that question. I thought that was very interesting. It said that the Snowden disclosures were a stage-managed campaign, and I began to understand it in a way that was different from others who may only be, relating to it emotionally. Snowden is a hero, or Snowden is a traitor. I was seeing some of the inner workings of the people surrounding those disclosures.
I see. So then, basically, then he may have been put out there, but then I would wonder, why would they put him out there to disclose truths like that? I mean, it doesn't really ring in their favor unless they're trying to get people to trust the mainstream medias or certain medias.
Well, as I understand, Sibel Edmonds, who's a heroic whistleblower in her own right, she's a former FBI translator whose testimony was removed from the 9/11 Commission's final report.
Yeah,
and she was subject to a gag order, I think, of 6 or 7 years. She said that the Snowden disclosures are serving as a form of propaganda for the intelligence agencies, because now every week the mainstream news has been talking about NSA this, NSA that, surveillance this, surveillance that, wiretapping this, wiretapping that, diminishment of human, free speech and privacy. And this is contributing to a culture of conditioning the public to accepting those conditions, to normalizing those conditions. And this is one of her criticisms, as I understand it, of this entire process, is that it's serving the purpose of normalizing behaviors that people within the intelligence community know have been going on for decades. In other words, she says there's nothing new about this. It's just that it's part of the police state culture to propagandize and make this, to talk about Justin Bieber and Edward Snowden in the same breath.
Yeah, and that makes sense too, because, you do run across people every day who say, I know they're listening to us. What can you do about it? Oh, well. And
so this is one of the criticisms.
Yeah. All right. I want to play that clip one more time for people, just in case anyone missed it. So here's the last clip that we played, and listen carefully. Those UFOs, I could hear it clearly.
And it really struck me. I mean, why is he talking about UFOs at a time like that?
Yeah, it does strike kind of strange, doesn't it?
Now, and this is not unlike the testimonies of the known contactees, people like Betty Hill, of the NASA astronauts. My studies of those people have found messages about saucers, about aliens. The people who engaged in the UFO issue, either through personal contact or through governmental roles or military roles, those people have messages about UFOs as well. So Snowden was like those people. He became, in my imagination, like the famous Scottish hacker. The name escaped me for a moment. A gentleman who was facing a 10-year course where the U.S. wanted to extradite him for hacking into NASA computers, where he found information about the secret space program. Yeah.
Oh, I remember that.
In a way, I saw a parallel between that gentleman and Edward Snowden as serving some kind of role in disclosure about UFO secrecy within government institutions, and in this case, within the intelligence organizations. So this was Edward Snowden's, the window into Edward Snowden. This was the chance to get audio from this gentleman, and that was the only interview available with him where there was audio until January of this year, when he appeared on NDR German television and gave a lengthy interview there. And this was my second opportunity to study him and to either further extend my understanding of his relationship to the UFO phenomena, or to debunk it and to say, it must have been only by accident. There was only one piece of evidence, just that tiny clip. So I studied the NDR interview, and I released an article in my column entitled "Edward Snowden's Psychic Human ETs Revealed." Well, by that title, you can tell there's something juicy in those findings when I was listening to the NDR interview, and all that served to do was deepen my appreciation for Edward Snowden's connection with the UFO and ET phenomena, in that he had some really significant insight into perhaps government files pertaining to contacts, even medical studies conducted on extraterrestrials. And so there were a series of clips that just only served to reinforce my position that Edward Snowden was definitely linked into this UFO and ET phenomena, and this was something that would emerge. It wasn't something present, because during the NDR interview in Moscow, he said absolutely nothing about UFOs whatsoever. It wasn't an interview about UFOs, but unconsciously he said a lot. And so let's go now to a clip that's got 48 and a half seconds, or almost 49 seconds.
Yep. Okay.
And we will play it up. Let's play the context up to 33 seconds. And this will show us where within the recording I was listening. And there's a couple of clips in here that we'll listen to together.
All right, great. So hold on, everyone, and take a listen.
It's no secret that every country in the world has the data of their citizens in the NSA. Millions and millions and millions of data connections from Germans going about their daily lives, talking on their cell phones, sending SMS messages, visiting websites, buying things online. All of this ends up at the NSA. And it's reasonable to suspect that the BND may be aware of it in some capacity. Now, whether or not they actively provide the information, I should not say.
The BND being German intelligence community, the question being, was there complicity between the NSA and German intelligence in collecting data about German citizens? So there are two messages encrypted within those phrases. The first one states, and if we play the audio up to 37 seconds, the first message states the words, knows an alien.
Oh, okay. Well, hold on. Let's do up to 37 seconds, you say.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Oh, wow.
Yeah. That knows an alien. The word alien now emerging. I had UFO from the earlier interview. Now I'm getting into alien territory with Edward Snowden. This is quite rich. UFO means an object, but an alien means an entity. We're getting a little deeper into the subject with Edward Snowden. He knows something. What the next phrase states in reverse, he says, variable, alien, we leave with it.
Ooh, okay. Let's do it. All right. Yeah, I can hear that.
The significance of the second message, we know that Edward Snowden left the NSA with a cache of materials, a cache of allegedly stolen files. He left with that material. Glenn Greenwald has stated that there is a secret cache of materials that are held by third parties that would be released if something happened to Edward Snowden. That was some kind of insurance policy. So this concept of the variable or the bargaining chip emerged in my mind when I heard that the alien file was a bargaining chip in the Edward Snowden cache of allegedly stolen materials, and that he was speaking to this issue in a very direct way. His intent to take that material from the NSA and utilize it in a series of perhaps negotiations or as an insurance policy. That occurred to me when I heard that material. I thought that was very interesting. But let's leap ahead, if we will, to the next clip, which is 40.5 seconds long.
Okay, and just 1 second there. I like to play these at least twice, so everybody.
Okay, certainly, yeah.
All right, so hold on a second.
Should not say.
Okay, so there you have it. So played it again, and I'll tell you, darn interesting. So let's go on to the next one now.
All right, so here we are digging deeper into the same NDR interview, looking for more materials. If we can play this clip, which is 40.5 seconds long, let's play it up to 26, 27 seconds, and that will get us into the context for the next set of messages.
Okay, so here we go.
The kind of things that they're discussing there are two things. They're talking about filtering of ingest, which means when the NSA puts a secret server in a German telecommunications provider, or they hack a German router and they divert the traffic in a manner that lets them search through things, they're saying, if I see what I think is a German talking to another German, I'll drop it. But
is that where you want?
Yeah, I believe that's where we are. So now we set up for this next clip. Here in reverse, I hear the words, "First I prove the alien heard our memory."
Okay. All right, here we go.
But how do you know?
Okay. Yeah, I can hear it. I can hear it. I mean, it's not, some of it's not, I mean, it's not like I'm talking to you right now, but certainly you can make it out.
You know, it's almost as if we were listening through a medium, as if people were talking underwater, for example. Yeah. And there are apparent distortions, and yet there appears to be signal transmission occurring even under those circumstances. It appears as if we're able to resolve something. You know, Newton had a mirror that only reflected 66% of the light, and yet he was able to resolve the phases of Venus and the moons of Jupiter, proven facts. So even under conditions of distortion, we were able to ascertain the facts in the Snowden recordings as well. Now, critics may say, you know, it's funny that the word alien is appearing in this set of messages and in the prior set. Could it be related to the a palindrome, you know, whereby Edward Snowden is simply repeating the same words to produce the same apparent effect backwards? Well, a quick study of the transcript shows that Edward Snowden's relying on an entirely different set of vocabulary in each utterance of the term alien. It's derived from unique vocabulary spoken at different times. These aren't palindromes or repetitions of the same words producing this effect. This is the word alien appearing under a variety of conditions, not related directly to simply repetition of the same word. Like a palindrome, the word mom or the word dad, said forwards or backwards, sound the same. Mm-hmm. These aren't palindromes, and it's not due to just the same source vocabulary. He's saying entirely different words. Now, what is the significance of this message? From my perspective as an observer, I see repetition. He's talking about aliens again. At this time, he's got aliens that are hearing people's memories. Well, how unlike the phenomena of clairaudience would that be? Perceptions of auditory phenomena, you know, in this case it would be listening to other people's thoughts. Clairvoyance means clear seeing, lucid seeing, or intuitive vision. Well, here we have clear listening, some kind of mental power whereby ostensibly an extraterrestrial or an alien is able to listen to the memories of other people. Was Edward Snowden engaged in a situation where he had proximity to, or was had a direct encounter with an extraterrestrial who was listening to people's memories and giving evidence for that they knew they were looking into people's minds through an auditory process and hearing what they were thinking about in their memories? Is that what he's saying? He's talking about proving this as if something had happened that had challenged him, and he wanted to further explore or experiment with this question, with this issue. It brings to for the concept of a psychic extraterrestrial who's able to read or listen to human thoughts, and not just the thoughts of the moment, but actually go into the sequestered memory banks, so to speak, and draw information from those sources to perhaps to the confoundment and the amazement of the subjects who were party to that. It was very suggestive that he was talking about psychic extraterrestrials when I heard that.
And, you know, it's very interesting that you say that and that you've gotten that out of that clip, because I've talked to people who claim to have been abducted or have had alien contact, and it seems like in every case, these ETs knew everything about them. And in the same notion, if the government was going to try to pull some false flag alien attack and they really wanted to convince a good part of the public, what better to do than to get all the information, data you can on everybody as much as possible. And then when that contact is made, it's like, well, hey, I know you. Here, I know this about you, and I know that about you. And how could I have known that if I haven't been watching you from the stars? So,
well, you've raised some valuable points. One being that the contact with the UFO has psychic implications, that the ETs are engaged in psychic communications with the contactees in different ways. And in fact, psychic or mental-based communications, consciousness-based communications and contact are actually more economic and efficient than orchestrating UFO flybys on a frequent basis. I mean, what's the cost of operating a flying saucer in the atmosphere and timing it so it flies by to signal people on the ground, just so that they can feel reassured that they're sharing this space with other entities? Isn't it more efficient and economical to have consciousness-based contacts? So I think it's a very interesting question that you raised. And the second question related to the operatives and their interrogative methods as a form of intimidation by presenting to people their private information as a means of representing that they somehow are all-knowing, that the victim of surveillance is somehow dealing with some all-knowing, all-powerful entity, is a means of diminishing their personhood, is an interrogative tactic intended to impact the personality of the individual and make them feel diminished. So injecting people with an inferiority complex, et cetera, bringing complicity or simply bringing about a mental breakdown. So occultists, in other words, like to play up their superpowers, and this idea is found in the black budget programs in the military, the remote assassination programs. I mean, the men who stare at goats, whether people thought that the movie was terrible or was actually had any legitimacy to it, was fundamentally about creating psychic assassins.
Yeah,
so,
and I think they've done a lot of work in that area, and if they can't do it with their minds, they could certainly do it with some of the technologies they've got.
So again, these presentations, these ambitions to become the psychic warrior, to the super soldier, the dream warfare, Inception-like personage, are all founded on occult ideals. People want to exert a demonic influence on the public by invading their dreams and giving them nightmares. It's all influenced by an occultic philosophy and a culture of occult practice that is the inheritance of the secret societies that have seeded the intelligence and military communities at the highest levels.
Absolutely. All right, John, I know we've got one more clip left, so hang on with me. I want to take our break quick, and we'll come back and we'll run through that one and talk a little and catch up on all this. John, we're back, and so what's next? What do we got here next?
Well, we're going to listen to the final of the series of Edward Snowden clips that we've been reviewing from my series on describing the secret messages of Edward Snowden that I wrote for the Vancouver UFO Examiner. My website is yourinnervoice.com, and I work as a clinician. I provide these services to individuals and couples, families, primarily by telephone. So people who are interested in their own secret messages, if they're inspired by what we're hearing tonight and would like to find out more about more insight into the processes happening within themselves, this is an awesome methodology, and I offer this as a clinical practice. So people can visit my website, yourinnervoice.com, to find out more about that, or you just call my toll-free number, which is 1-888-453-0751. That's 1-888-453-0751. So here in this demonstration, I've been analyzing, using a mirror filter, the spoken statements of NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden, highly controversial figure, to provide unique insights into his testimony that had, up until this past week, had remained unreported by any other circle until the emergence of new documents that were just released. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But here we are looking at the final clip from the NDR North German television interview. And if we can roll up to 25 seconds, we can hear the context of this final and I think very important message from the unconscious mind of Edward Snowden.
All right, and would this be the 38-second clip?
Yeah, 38 second, and roll to 25 if you will.
Okay, we'll do. Here we go.
If the NSA isn't collecting information on German citizens in Germany, are they as soon as it leaves German borders? And the answer is yes. Any single communication that transits the internet, the NSA may intercept at multiple points. They might see it in Germany, they might see it in Sweden, they might see it in Norway or Finland, they might see it in Britain, and they might see it in the United States.
All right, so there we are. That's our context. What do we hear in the mirror? When I play that backwards, I can hear Edward Snowden say the words, "The alien that is human, then their blood is human."
Oh, okay. So let's play it.
In the United States.
Okay. And just to clarify to people, before we even came on the air tonight, I actually put these in my audio player, and I listened to them with some headphones on, and you can clearly hear what's being said. So, but go. We'll play it again too in just a few minutes. But so go ahead and explain that a little further. So now, alien blood. What's he talking about?
Well, this invoked, in my imagination, this invoked the concept of medical experiments being conducted on extraterrestrials, and of course, the lore, the legend, the mythology, the testimony that surrounds the crashed spacecraft from Roswell moving forwards includes concepts of extraterrestrials, either living or deceased, taken to secret bases to be participants in studies, research, medical examinations. Here, the concept of a human extraterrestrial with human blood is invoked in this message, bringing the human and the extraterrestrial closer together, with we being the human population and the ET being the ostensibly the spacecraft pilot, but apparently not so dissimilar. In other words, we're not talking about a scenario involving little green men or giant praying mantises or some sort of construct, but rather something that is apparently more like us. And this is something, an idea circulating in the mind and the consciousness of Edward Snowden, released through an unconscious and involuntary process, not unlike sleep talking. Simply it's detected or decoded through the use of a mirror. You know, one of the journalists on RT had stated in the last few weeks that it's the job of the journalist to decipher what the newsmakers are telling us, and so this is an explicit. Abby Martin said that, and this is an explicit example. Here, as a journalist, I am absolutely deciphering the statements of Edward Snowden, but in a way that is unique, and as I said earlier, in a way that anticipated what has now become mainstream knowledge. So this message compounded my understanding, which began in June of 2013, that Edward Snowden was linked to UFO information. In the series of messages derived from the NDR interview, I have determined in 3 separate instances that Edward Snowden has something to say about aliens, and in this case, aliens that are human-like, with human-like blood, as if he'd been exposed to materials, files, for example, describing medical experiments conducted on extraterrestrials, drawing blood samples and studying them through microscopy or other means to determine their genetic content, et cetera, concluding that they had human-like qualities. You know, in many circumstances, 3 is the rule. Norman Mineta invoked what people call the rule of 3 when talking about the 9/11 aircraft, and as the Secretary of Transportation, he called for all the aircraft to be grounded when it was determined that they were hijacked airplanes crashing into buildings. He invoked the rule of 3, and I wrote about this in my article. He said explicitly that he said, when you see one of something happen, it's an accident. And then he said, When you see two of the same thing happening, it's a trend. But he further compounded this by stating, when you see three, it's a plan. There's something intelligent happening here. There are three instances of Edward Snowden communicating about aliens in my transcript, and thereby I derive, simply by utilizing the widely accepted rule of three, which was invoked by Norman Mineta during his testimony to the 9/11 Commission. I mean, it's a pretty serious situation, and here he is invoking the rule of three. I think we've got the rule of three here. Three instances of alien-related communications from Edward Snowden equal Edward Snowden's connection to UFOs and extraterrestrial-related issues.
Yeah, and this could mean a couple things. One, it could be that our brothers and sisters throughout the universe are just like us, or it could mean that maybe at some point in history humans actually did leave this planet, and now they've come back.
That our genetic heritage is related to the blood or the genes of the ETs, exactly. So your point is well made. I think now what we need to look at is that in the course of bringing this particular report forwards, particularly on Facebook, I wrote about this, that I was subject to all kinds of very provocative encounters with not only with Facebook group members, but group administrators, in which this story was actually censored from one group that actually advertises itself as a haven from censorship online. The administrator censored that particular story in a dogmatic, rabid, and defamatory way, citing me as an author of disinformation. In other groups, it was claimed that I was acting as an agent of a COINTEL program by publishing such information. So I was really acting as an independent, non-official party, engaging in what was by all means an uncontrolled disclosure. I was really starting to engage with the teeth of the online operative environment that has particularly come into manifestation in 2014. I would say the uptake in operatives online, perceived from the desk of an activist journalist, has risen, as if the 2014 program and all its staffing has been ramped up to the maximum and is rolled out with intensity. So I wrote about this in my column under the title, the third in this series, Leaked Document Confirms 2013 Examiner Report Linking Edward Snowden to UFOs. So what happened? I had published these two stories beginning 7 months prior, and on February 24th, 2014, just 3 days ago, the Intercept website released 3 UFO images as part of a 50-page or 50-slide PowerPoint presentation from what it describes as the Edward Snowden archives of secret files allegedly stolen from the NSA. I stated that publication of this document, entitled The Art of Deception, Training for a New Generation of Online Covert Operations, now offers independent third-party evidence linking the self-styled surveillance program whistleblower to UFOs in support of claims that first appeared in an internationally syndicated news article, which we've discussed, that was released over 7 months earlier. Real-world circumstances caught up with my reporting, and the documents surfaced that tied Edward Snowden to the UFO phenomena. There are 3 slides in that presentation that are pictures of flying saucers, either from photography or video. Edward Snowden is linked to the UFO issue now in a tangible third-party way. It's not just my opinion. It's not just my interpretation of a reflection. It's now it's a matter of public knowledge that the cache of Edward Snowden archives contain UFO information. This is really a stunning development because, as I said, I was up against Guardian censorship. I was up against Facebook censorship, as I reported in this most recent article. I was being cast as someone who was really on their own with this claim that I was very much in isolation. If you were to believe some of the more aggressive people who interviewed me in the past 2 months, where I tried to talk about these issues, the interrogation-like interviews that I endured bringing this story forward, I knew that I had come up against the teeth of an operation that attempted to control discourse around the Snowden disclosures, and that as a journalist, it only meant that I was on the right track. Well, circumstances caught up, and the reality turned out to be that Edward Snowden is connected via these published documents, these now publicly available documents on the Intercept website that contain so much more insight into what some people are describing as the training manual for online operatives or trolls, the troll playbook, as some people have characterized it.
Yeah.
Well, that troll playbook contains UFO images. Edward Snowden is tied to the UFO issue. It's a matter of public record, and so my reporting has been vindicated. My reputation was challenged, certainly in the social network environment. People were making very distressing and defamatory claims towards me as a consequence of my reporting. But the truth of the matter is that Edward Snowden was in possession of UFO documents. I would suggest that the implications are that exposure to that material had a very deep impact on his mind. So intense, in fact, that it influenced his spoken communications during both the initial Hong Kong interview for The Guardian and the NDR interview from Moscow. That the impact of that, the psychological impact of that knowledge, that access, that exposure, played heavily into his speech patterns, and I was able to resolve that. I was able to decode that using non-proprietary technology. I gazed into a mirror, just like Isaac Newton in the 17th century, and I resolved scientific facts that are now a matter of public record.
And, you know, it goes without saying that I always thought that there had to be what's called a playbook for these online trolls, because they all seem to use the same methods. I mean, you could read them like a coach that's been in the NFL for 20 years and has never changed his playbook. You know what they're going to do. It's always the same thing. I deal with it too. I get censored like crazy, especially on Facebook. You know, I love people add me to their groups. Oh, I love you. You do such a good job. And as soon as I start posting some truth, it's like banned. And it's funny.
Yeah, and it's refreshing to hear your testimony to the fact of this very hostile information warfare environment that we find ourselves in. But one of the indicators of the staleness or the stagnancy of the plays, so to speak, is that those people are in it for a paycheck. This is a 9-to-5 operation for those people. They have no personal connection to any of this. They're not in this for advocacy reasons. They're in it for a paycheck, and you know, essentially, I would suggest that the majority of them are below the pay. What we're working with here, these truths that we're dealing with, these difficult truths, are well above the pay grade of your average operator. They're not qualified to engage in conversations about these issues, and the stagnancy of their approach is clearly indicative that they're only in it for a paycheck. Well, they've sold out the rights and freedoms of the public for a paycheck. I find that far less than honorable or dignified, quite frankly.
That's right. And I've been saying it for a while here. I'm all for freedom of speech, but as we all know, with freedom of speech also comes responsibility. Just like the right to bear arms comes with responsibility. You can't just go out in the middle of a 4-lane highway and start shooting your gun off. Well, you know, at the same token, I'd like to see these so-called news outlets online be held more accountable for the stuff that they pass around, because so many times you find them who, you know, these certain ones who will just put any nonsense out there, and it's either they're purposely trying to misinform or they're just looking for hits on their website, and it really does discredit the rest of us who do use the internet to get the real news out. And so, you know, I don't want to see any control over the internet by no means, but at the same time, you know, these people got to be held accountable. When they lie to you and they get caught lying to you, you don't give them free passes for that. And I see so many times, one in particular is Veterans Today. I can go over there and comment on one of their stories and they will delete my comment so quick it ain't funny. And I've dealt with one of the people who run that, Gordon Duff. And he himself admitted that 40% of what he puts out is lies. And he says he has to do it because he fears for his life. Well, if you fear for your life, step down off the stage and don't be a target. Don't lie to people. And yet people say, yeah, but he still tells the truth about other things. Okay, well then go back to your mainstream media, because they do that too. They'll give you a little bit of truth and they'll lie to you. It's just, I don't know. It just puzzles me. What do people want? Do they want the truth, or do they just want a good story?
Well, with knowledge comes responsibility, and leadership. Part of leadership, being a thought leader in this era, relates to avoiding reckless behavior that endangers any community. That invites catastrophe. If we want to have success and become united in ways that foster synergies and sharing of resources and rapid development, then the responsibility becomes that we have to become good stewards and not give the secrets of nuclear power to kindergarten children. Give the keys to the car to a 5-year-old and invite them to go and drive it down the street. That's reckless and irresponsible. So, in the course of my journey, as a researcher, as an advocate, as a public figure for 15 odd years, these are lessons that were impressed upon me. And over the course of time, just due to visibility and access to audiences, I've had chances to talk to people in military occupations and other positions to have conversations about issues pertaining to leadership and responsibility. And these are recognized issues. People on the ground understand that reckless behavior really doesn't have a place anywhere. But at the same time, as adults, there is room for informed discussion and adult conversation. And if we impoverish the marketplace of ideas in a way that was understood by the lawmakers in Great Britain at the time of the formation of the U.S. Constitution, but through acts of prior restraint and censorship, it without a doubt, we're condemning our entire society to massive ignorance, which will only lead to catastrophe. So, in fact, I say that the drive towards censorship is, in fact, reckless, is, in fact, irresponsible, is in fact an indicator of deficiencies of leadership, and that the people who are empowered with good minds and consciences need to step up to the plate. Those people in our society need to step up into active roles to help to steward our society in a better direction. The recklessness and irresponsibility at this point, as far as I'm concerned, is definitely weighs on the side of those who are attempting to enforce brutal environment of secrecy, harassment, trollism, and all those other behaviors.
Absolutely. So now let me ask you this: do you see a solution in the future? Do you see a way to find? I mean, outside of say 50 million people standing up with their pitchforks and torches, do you see a way to get? I mean, how do we stop this? This has got to stop. This we're turning into. I mean, this isn't even America no more. They're collecting all this data for a reason, and I don't think we're going to like the reason. So we need to put a stop to it somehow.
Well, my simple interpretation of events is that the good people in all strata of society need to take an active stance in the face of these dangers. Upon recognition of the dangerous course that is being intensely promoted, those people need to step up to the plate and accept some responsibility and perhaps even some self-sacrifice at this point for the sake of the collective good. If those people are awakened, then through legislative means, these questions can be resolved. These criminal activities can be overturned. Criminal government activities can be overturned. Institutional activities that can be overturned. We see now that, for example, the independent states are moving forwards to enact bills that deny access to resources like power and water to the NSA institutions within their states.
Yeah.
They are creating an unwelcome environment for those federal institutions to say that we reject the immorality and criminality of your behavior, that it's below the standard of our state, and we will not accept it on a legislative level. They are attempting to enact those bills. Those good people are standing up. They exist, and those people need to be found and supported. The public needs to get behind the good people who are already in place, who just may not be as active as they need to be, or engaging with these issues. Those people need to be encouraged and supported to take good actions now. That is our best chance, because otherwise, if we fail on a legislative level to resolve these issues, then what we will be left with are mob actions in the forms of revolutionary type behaviors that will bring about situations that can lead to complete military police state type takeover. Because if people, go in and burn down the halls of government, that will create a power vacuum, and the first people that will step in will be the military to take over the entire society, and that's an inevitable situation. That's what we see historically in the French Revolution and other revolutionary wars of the past. So those are very destructive scenarios. If people are tired of having their children, pedophiled at the airport by the TSA, if they're sick of that, if that's enough for people to stand up and push for legislation, then we will see something happen. But if the public is apathetic, brain dead, hypnotized, mind controlled, apathized, consumerized, then we will, like animals, we will find ourselves in the midst of a slaughter, and that's not a desirable outcome. The pearls and jewels that founded our society, the good intentions that started us off on this path, that brought us here, we can't dishonor that. That the wishes of the people who came before us, Benjamin Franklin, or was it Thomas Jefferson? I think it was Ben Franklin who said those that would subvert freedom for so-called security deserve neither.
Yeah,
I mean that's a founding father. I mean, in honor of Ben Franklin, shouldn't people who've been educated in that philosophy be standing up for those values now and say, taking a paycheck to become an online troll is the subversion of freedoms for some sort of illusion of security? Shouldn't they be saying that now? Isn't it the time to invoke the good wishes of the people who came before us, the inventors, the great people who created the foundations for whatever is good in our society? Shouldn't we be honoring that? It's a time for us to look at those questions and ask, is what we're pursuing now, these pipe dreams that we're pursuing now, really worth the cost that we're inflicting, and of course at the expense of the future generations? The conditioning that's happening to the children, again, by being subject to sexual abuse at the airport, for example, on a mass scale, is conditioning them for a life of victimization. This is happening on a mass scale now. People want to protect their future generations from becoming a population of victims. Need to step up to the plate, and the first place to look is the people in place in the legislature and the judicial community who are already there, who are simply not active enough to get behind these people and support them to take the difficult steps and to even engage in a level of personal sacrifice versus the willingness to throw the rights of the public under the bus and sacrificing everybody else for some short-term ambition like a paycheck. Which is the problem, at the extreme. That's what's happening now, and by that troll playbook that's been published, well, it is happening. Top Secret America employs 750,000 people, and a lot of them are these these online trolls. That's the day job. So these are my concerns. These are my thoughts on these questions. My website is yourinnervoice.com. I'm a clinician. I have a private practice. I've been operating for 15 years. I do cutting-edge research in human growth and development, enhanced behavior and performance. These acoustic studies help people resolve the issues, the complicated problems. The insight is very powerful, and it's considered a short-term intervention. I've worked with people in the medical community, all kinds of different segments of society. I offer the service through my website. People can call me toll-free. It's 1-888-453-0751. It's 1-888-453-0751, or visit my website, yourinnervoice.com.
All right. And, John, let's not make it so long between the next time that we have you on. I've really enjoyed talking with you tonight, and looking forward to doing it again really soon.
It's great to be with you, Michael. I'm so glad that you invited me to be back on your show.
All right. Well, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your week, your weekend, and keep up the great work, my friend.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye. Okay, everybody. That's Jon Kelly.
In layman's terms, that the brain understands backward speech. So through the use of digital audio technology and precision mirror filtering, scientists were investigating speech intelligibility and determining that the brain could resolve speech forwards or backwards. One of the lead scientists, Dr. Kourish Saberi from the University of California at Irvine, one of the lead scientists in that study, commented in a publicized interview that human speech is a multidimensional phenomenon. That was his conclusion based on those studies. Speech is a multidimensional phenomena, and there are different ways by which we can derive a message from it. Those were his exact words. So science has opened the doors to investigative studies that explore the various dimensions of speech. My studies focus on the mirror dimension and its corresponding natural or forwards time dimension, just 2 dimensions. But according to science, there's more than 2 dimensions to speech. So reflection, mirrors, this is what we're using to study speech recordings. It's simply put that natural human speech, speech communications that take place every day through most of us who are gifted with speech and hearing, that's the majority of the population, those can be interpreted using a mirror filter. In my case, I'm using what's called a digital audio workstation, which is a computer that's configured with software to perform a variety of audio editing functions. Those speech recordings can be interpreted using such a system. It's not a proprietary system. It's off-the-shelf technology. And through those reflections, we can resolve additional insight into speech communications. It's understood that what we're picking up on through these studies, by those resolutions of communications, relate to other types of unconscious speech phenomena that are widely known and accepted. One being what's called the Freudian slip, which most of us are familiar with, which is a situation in which a speaker may involuntarily utter information that they didn't intend to say in the course of normal speech. They may disclose something that was not intentional, and yet people say these things, and it's noted as what's called a Freudian slip when that happens. And another form of speech communications that many people participate in, Michael, you may know some people who do this, it's called sleep talking. Do you know anyone who talks in their sleep?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Well, we know that when the sleep talker is communicating, that those statements are not volitional on the part of their conscious mind. The conscious mind isn't engaged in sleep talking. It's unconscious communications. It's involuntary expansion and contraction of the vocal muscles, the muscular tissues related to speech formation, like the tongue, the larynx. Those involuntary contractions and expansions are creating utterances that can be using what he devised as the first reflector telescope. Now, in order to construct that telescope, he utilized a mirror made out of metal alloy, and that alloy composition was called speculum metal, or mirror metal, speculum being Latin for mirror. It's said that Newton's mirror possessed 66% reflectivity and 34% light absorbency. And so he was using a very lossy technology. He was losing 34% of the incoming light transmission. So we can understand if a soda pop costs $1 and we go to the store with 66 cents, we may not be able to get that $1 soda pop with our 66 cents. We'll be 34 cents short. And if we're communicating like on the show tonight, and 34% of my sentences are truncated or parsed, it may be difficult for people to understand what I'm talking about, because some important things could be lost in that transmission when there's a 34% rate of loss. And yet, in spite of those shortcomings, in spite of that lossy mirror that Newton relied on, he was still able to resolve phenomena that included the phases of Venus, where it waxes and wanes just like our moon. And he was also able to resolve moons of Jupiter, which are both the phases of Venus and the moons of Jupiter are known factual phenomena. This is in the 17th century. If you wind the clock up into our 21st century, at the very turn of the millennium, there were reports emerging out through scientific journals, including Nature, whereby scientists in Southern California at the University of California at Irvine were conducting studies using digital mirror technology to reflect recordings of human vocal transmissions. Those digital mirrors were operating in a lossless way, meaning that they provided 100% reflectivity and zero loss of sound transmission. So a much more refined mirror, a much more precise means of reflection. And they found through their studies that when they intermingled human speech recordings that were spliced forwards and backwards in different varying percentages, that observers were able to decipher and decode the speech in those recordings, irrespective of how much backward speech was contained therein. So this was reported in letters to one of the editions of Nature, which is a highly respected scientific journal. And this was later picked up by the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society. The Royal Society, which was in fact the group steered by Newton in his lifetime. He was the president of that esteemed scientific community in the United Kingdom. They're still active today, and they noted this study in their Philosophical Transactions, which is their journal publication. And it was, essentially determined to solve this speech communications. So we know that there is such a thing as unconscious speech behavior in the Freudian slip and in sleep talking. And so I say, these reflections are also indications of such unconscious behavior, that a part of the mind that apparently functions in a way that is independent of time is able to formulate and transmit communications against what physicists call the arrow of time. Against that arrow of time, time, according to physics, is all moving forwards. But here we have evidence of communications phenomena contrary to that arrow, antagonistic to that arrow's direction, in fact, traveling in the opposite direction. So the philosophical speculation is that the part of the mind that is actively engaged in those communications is functioning in a way that's operating independent of time.
I see. So now, in the case of somebody who's talking in their sleep, now my son does that quite often. When he's here, he'll fall asleep early and he'll talk in his sleep. One night, he was actually swearing in his sleep. And I had to debate whether I should wake him up with a kick to his butt or if he just did not know what was going on. I mean, when something like this happens, is there a reason to really pay attention to what they're saying in their sleep? I mean, is it just mumbo jumbo, or is there some kind of truth coming out with this?
Well, it's certainly symptomatic of some sort of activity of the mind. I mean, if we're not at peace over something within ourselves, something is unresolved, we may seek to work that out through sleep talking or sleepwalking or other kinds of somnambulistic behaviors. Active dreaming, of course, is another way. So should we judge others for their involuntary indiscretions? That's a very good question. I say that the conscious individual is innocent of those behaviors. We shouldn't judge others for their involuntary actions, but we should at the same time take note that if somebody's sleep is disturbed, there may be something emerging in their life experience that needs to be addressed or needs to be resolved, and that observation of those phenomena may provide a window into discussion or exploration, working together with that person to help them work out the details in their lives that may be troubling them while they're attempting to rest.
I see. And all too often you hear, say, a public speaker will slip, as you say, and say something, say, "Oh, I don't know where that came from. That's not what I meant." How should we take that when that happens? I mean, because is there cases where they really just slipped up? And
well, again, it's innocent on part of the speaker, but there are times when
my guest tonight, Jon Kelly, is an international clinician, if I'm saying that right, and internationally acclaimed communications expert who released key intelligence pertaining to the Iraq War 2 years ago in advance of the shock and awe strikes against Baghdad in 2003. as a former feature producer for CBS Radio with experience in #1 rated U.S. television. His work exploring consciousness, communications, the paranormal, and UFO phenomena have been featured in USA Today, Dallas Morning News, Florida Today, Wall Street Journal, Independent IE, UC Irving Today, Coast to Coast AM, Fox News, CBS Radio and Television, CBC, BBC, London, Dutchland Radio Berlin, AOL News, Tehran's Fars News Agency, and UFO Digest and Forbes.com. So he's been a lot of places, folks, and he's here with us tonight on Late Night in the Midlands. I'm just going to pull up my phone lines here and bring him in with me. So with that, everybody, please welcome Jon Kelly in just a second. Jon, welcome back to Late Night in the Midlands. How are you?
Great, Michael. It's good to be with you again.
Well, it's great to have you here. You sound great.
Right on. Thank you.
All right. So it's been a long time since you've been on.
Well, good friends don't always get to see each other, and so I'm just happy to return.
Well, thank you, and I'm very happy to have you here. And I did get the clips that you sent me, and I've got them loaded up, and at some point we'll get into those. I'd like to start out, though, because we got a lot of new listeners from the last time you've been on. Jon, what drove you in this direction that you've taken, going down this rabbit hole and investigating and researching the areas you have?
Well, I guess I feel a strong sense of identification with looking into life's mysteries, frontiers of knowledge and science and human understanding. Areas of great mystery have crossed. My life has crossed those areas at different times, even since childhood. I'm someone who's had contact with Sasquatch in British Columbia, a lot of UFO contact, other kinds of interdimensional phenomena, psychic visions, lucid dreaming, out-of-body experience. I'm eventually somebody who got intensely involved in meditation practices and have been doing those for over 25 years as a means of navigating all of the different mysteries that just popped up in my life. So I'm one of those people who came here with some destiny attached to or connection with the mysteries of life and the frontiers of knowledge. And I've just been active in these areas as best I can. And there's circumstances have prevailed to support me to continue to work in these areas.
Great. And I understand that you're friends with Alfred Weber. He's a good friend of ours as well. We've had him on several times.
Alfred is one of my colleagues here in Vancouver, British Columbia, and I've collaborated with him on numerous broadcasts over the last decade or so, and other related projects. Exo University, we covered the serial killer tapes that I studied, the Robert Pickton recordings. We covered that together. It's on my YouTube channel. So it's been great to have access to Alfred, who's such a wonderful resource person to so many people. Rich with ideas and insight, and someone who's really able to frame events, contemporary events, in context due to his decades of experience on the front lines of research into psi, futurism, etc.
Absolutely. Now I want to talk a little bit about reverse speech and what got you started in that, and what is, I guess people sit on the fence with it. They think, it's interesting, but could it really be what they're actually saying? So maybe you could explain the reverse speech just a little bit to us. Tell us more about that.
Well, these studies that have been popularized under the name reverse speech really are based on the phenomena of reflection. Phenomena of reflection are older than life itself. As soon as liquid bodies appeared in the universe, like oceans of water and such on a solid Earth, before life emerged, those liquid bodies possessed reflective characteristics, which means that sunlight beaming down from the sky could reach a pond or a puddle, and those photons could be reflected back from that surface to some degree. So the phenomenon of reflection is ancient, and we as humans find ourselves in a world possessed of that phenomenon in different ways. Man-made reflectors are called mirrors, and the production of mirrors is something that goes back into ancient societies using different materials. People have been mirror gazing or studying reflections, so to speak, scrying for thousands of years. There's references to it in Greek literature and other literary sources from classical societies. I think for contemporary people, it's important to note that through the process of mirror gazing in the 17th century, Isaac Newton was able to resolve the phases of Venus and the moons of Jupiter